Well, welcome everybody to the Parental Alienation Awareness Day conference brought to you by Parents Beyond Breakup. We've been running since Father's Day 1999, keeping mums and dads alive and in their kids' lives. Parental alienation can be an emotive topic, and you may hear differing views or experiences today. If you have any strong emotions coming up or want any further one-on-one support, please call us on our helpline. It's open 7 days a week. If you're within Australia, the number is 1300 853 437. I might invite Dr. Stan Korosi in, and perhaps if you could both speak to that higher level around policy and what's needed. What perspective do we need to enact some of that change that PBB is starting to lead right now?
Sure. Let's welcome Stan.
Thank you.
I'll let you introduce yourself, Stan. Who are you?
Well, you all know my name. I am what I'd call a lived experience practitioner. So I have my own experience as an alienated parent, and that will be 20 years old in January next year. Okay. So I think there's somewhere out there is a daughter who is 28 years old and will be 29 next year. And there you go. Haven't really had a relationship with her since she was 8 years old. And no, I don't know why. Never had that conversation with her. So, and then the other side of the coin is I have been working in the field of alienated family relationships for nearly 12 years now. I made a decision that if I couldn't help myself, I would certainly try to help parents and family members who were affected by it. And so up until recently, I was a special witness in the Family Court of Australia, and I provided an evidence-based remediation for alienated parent-child relationships. And I've also sort of part of a network of practitioners who provide various services in what I call the alienation life cycle, for want of a better way of putting it. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, Stan, listen, thank you for joining us today. And actually, folks, this is exactly what I was kind of talking about, the fact that, you know, we now we're so lucky in Australia to have professionals who are qualified in this field with some seniority behind them and the real world lived experience. So, you know, you can trust that they come from a good place. So look, without further ado though, Stan, there's a few questions I really would like to ask you to share with us, because I think, you know, today is about actually moving into action. So it's Parental Alienation Awareness Day 2024. What can we reflect on about alienated family relationships and social and legal responses to it at this time?
Well, thank you, Pete. And just to build on some of the comments you made earlier, Australian family law in its current form is close to 50 years old. You know, this Family Law Act, the Family Law Act of Australia, 1975. Well, you can do your mathematics on that. It's 50 years old. It brought in no-fault separation and divorce, and the concept of parental alienation is about 40 years old, almost to the date. So there is a very strong argument that we have a family law system and a social and legal setting that doesn't adequately respond to parental alienation, its behaviours that are a very specific and special form of, we would call it coercive control, but coercive control of itself is not an adequate descriptor for what alienation is, okay? In its severe forms, in my view, alienation is really politically motivated intimate terror in family relationships. In its really severe form, it can be fatal. Parents can become murderous, induce children and the targeted parent into suicide. So we're really talking about something quite beyond the severe. It's actually quite extreme. And I would propose that our current environment in terms of public health policies and law does not adequately address parental alienation and its behaviours. It doesn't understand what they are because it views them through a very narrow gendered lens, which is an ideology, a political orientation. And it doesn't understand that parental alienation occurs across socio-demographic division. So that's just a complicated way of saying that it doesn't matter how much money you earn or what your education is, what your ethnic or racial background is, or what your religion you are. Parental alienation, its behaviours are common. When they occur, they are common across all of those what we call social divisions. So when policymakers and lawmakers make public policy and law, they typically look at social demographics, who's affected in what sector, traditionally, or the contemporary approach right now is to look at it in terms of gender inequality. Well, sorry, folks, you got it wrong. Parental alienation affects virtually all genders equally. And that's something that policymakers and lawmakers don't take into account. So their laws actually are harming the people that they claim to protect. So where we are, what to reflect on is that Australia is actually going backwards compared to other countries. So in some countries like Brazil, parental alienating behaviours are actually criminal behaviour. In other countries like Romania, it's proscribed, or it's treated as child psychological abuse and maltreatment. In other countries, there are time-limited approaches to dealing with disrupted family relationships. So in some countries, rather than taking 3 years in our family law system, it's all over within 6 months, and your first court hearing is in 3 weeks. Now, that's something we're not even close to. The other thing that we can reflect on, and it builds on the comment you made before, Pete, about flag waving and protests not really getting anywhere, is that the whole field of parental alienation theory, its practices, and the fact that we have a very growing and more empowered group of alienated family members to work with and adult alienated children, is that we have the potential to disrupt what would be otherwise an oppressive process. So if we think about where we stand now, parental alienation, its concept and its theories and its practices are infiltrating everywhere. And the fact that we are facing mounting reaction against us in some sectors tells me that, if I can use a military metaphor, if you're taking fire, we're over the target. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and look, Stan, just sorry to interrupt you, but I think we will come. I'm really curious what the audience think about some of the things you spoke about. You touched upon Australia going backwards, and that's certainly something I wanted to bring up a little bit later. But also you spoke about best practice from other countries like Brazil and potentially Romania. And let's see if the audience asks questions around that later on and expand on it. But maybe if I move us on to kind of maybe the next kind of part of your kind of talk, how do the social and policy factors that you kind of made reference to, how does it affect the work of an organization like PBB? How does it impact us?
Well, for those who don't know, I'm actually on the board of directors of Parents Beyond Breakup, and I've been associated with it in its previous incarnations for more than 10 years in one form or another. So I'm well aware of how, if I can use a hospital metaphor, the emergency room is filled with people trying to recover from suicide, PTSD, adverse mental health outcomes, because their family relationships have been disrupted in the course of divorce and separation. It's difficult to come to numbers on this, but I don't see us going out of business in a hurry. And so, unfortunately, thank you for that, unfortunately. And I would suggest that the current changes in Australian family law, and specifically the dilution, if not removal, of a rebuttable presumption of shared care, I don't think it's reducing the number of people seeking help from us. I mean, we're in the business, of keeping mums and dads alive and in their children's lives. And it's making our job harder. We have to provide more and more services. And we think that's linked to the fact that the alienating behaviours that we come across are directly resulting in adverse mental health outcomes that include suicide. So no, it's not helping us at all. And so we've got a lot more to do with our community.
So look, I mean, thinking on that, expanding, what should we be focusing on to address this?
I think at the broad sort of leadership level that you alluded to is that we really need to be at the table, have a seat at the table with policymakers and lawmakers, and to discuss with the new policy frameworks that address parental alienation and their behaviours as a special form of non-gendered coercive control. We also need to sponsor research that studies the linkage between alienating behaviours, suicidality, adverse mental health outcomes, PTSD. We know that there's been some recent studies in the United Kingdom that link parental alienating behaviours with suicidality and PTSD over and above the rate of suicide that would normally accompany separation, parents separating and divorcing without going through alienating behaviours. So we know from the UK that this is a very special situation that we need to investigate. And so we also need to focus on the social costs of the effects of parental alienation, the effects of disrupting family relationships through separation and divorce. These hit society and public health with enormous costs. What are they? It's usually cheaper to prevent them than to address them after they've happened. That's the classic political mantra. So I think we can do a lot better and focus on solutions to the problem. You know, politicians, in my limited experience, want to know what to do. Well, I'm happy to tell them very specifically. I also think that, again, and Elise and I are good examples of lived experience practitioners who are in the field working with other professionals and in other domains. And in my work over the last 12 years, a number of parents have decided to dramatically change their life scripts and their careers. And several of them have just now finished their, in some cases, clinical psychology degrees and are looking for, you know, how to orient themselves in this field. At least one person in our network is a parental alienation trained social worker who's also a family consultant. And as far as I know, the first one in Australia. So we are doing what family violence advocates did in the 1960s and 70s, which is to get inside educational institutions and professional bodies and start shaking them up.
The so-called long march through the institutions.
Works for them. Look where we are now.
Yeah. So look, on a final bit, perhaps, if we could wrap up this section around, look, state elections are coming up. Federal elections are due at some point soon. What do you think that this community should be thinking about what our proposed leaders out there are offering us?
Well, that's a really good question, because when I look around at what our proposed prospective leaders are saying, what policies they're offering, we are certainly focused on climate change, the cost of living, the insecurity of the world environment as it currently stands. And a lot of people are understandably focused on that. And yet, while we may choose our politics on the basis of who's going to save us money, who's going to protect us, what we don't know is whether those politicians are proposing policies that are actually going to dismantle families as you know it. Because the politics of alienation are that if you look at our laws, they're not supporting family relationships as being in a child's best interest. If they were to do so, they wouldn't have removed the rebuttable presumption of shared parenting. They wouldn't have gendered family violence laws because the statistics don't support them. So what if you voted for someone who was going to save you money, save your house, because you can now pay your mortgage, keep you safe in the world, do something about climate change, but will destroy your family as well alongside it. This is an impossible dilemma. But each of us has an individual choice to make around that. And I would closely examine what political candidates are offering in terms of family policies. How are they going to preserve family relationships? What is their idea of what's in a child's best interest? What I would say is that alienated parents and adult alienated children and alienated family members, because let's not forget, alienation ripples through families, it affects everyone. We vote, and we need to let our members and our prospective candidates know that we vote. We want to know what they're going to do and what their policies are. So I would say write to your local member and the prospective candidates and ask.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And in fact, actually, Stan, I remember having an impromptu accidental meeting with a senior political advisor who went on to win a knighthood. He's an Australian from Sydney, but he went on to win a knighthood in the UK because he advised and managed to get certain presidents in the US and in prime ministers in the UK. But he did tell me something quite interesting about that, which he said that women tend to, what the focus groups always show is that across the developed world, that women do care about their personal situation and their families and tend to actually think about that when they vote, whereas men generally think about war and the economy. So this is a call out for the men out there. Start thinking about your family. Start thinking about your family when you're voting.
Well, if you think about it, the climate change rejoinder is there is no planet B, right?
Yeah.
And there is no family than the one you have.
Yeah. Good point.
And there are political views out there trying to dismantle that.
Sadly. Oh, but listen, thank you, Stan.